Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our webinar today on the topic of employee morale. It's great to have a lot of interest in this from the number of participants we saw that registered. So I think it's a topic that certainly is touching our industry. Some of you may be members of what we call the Executive Customer Support Brain Trust. Our Brain Trust is a opportunity for people in the industry to get together, discuss topics of interest to the customer support, customer success community. And this topic of maintaining employee morale has been consistently, month after month, been one of the topics that's been listed on our board as an issue that's touching everybody in the industry, and has a lot of relevance, I think, to all of us who work in the customer support space. So we're pleased to have Tyler Stewart with us. I'm going to share our materials over here. And 1 minute.
Thanks for having me, Alan. I'm excited to talk about this topic too. In my experience, this is one of the most important topics that we interact with the most in customer support. And knowing that there's no exact right answer and it takes a lot of hard work, I'm excited to talk it through today.
Great. It's great to have you here. So, Tyler, maybe you could just give us a little bit about your background, what you do, and a little bit where you were before.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, my name's Tyler Stewart. I'm currently the head of customer support at Divvy Homes. We're a relatively young company based out of San Francisco, though we operate in markets that are in the South and the East for the most part. And I've been here just about a year now. Before Divvy Homes, I worked for Airbnb. I started back in 2015 with Airbnb, right as it was starting its big growth phase. I started as an operations manager at Airbnb, managing some of the premium segments of customer support, and then moved into a strategy and planning role that was in what we called community education. So these were the lower complexity, high volume topics that Airbnb customer support interacted with, and it made up about 40% of the global support offerings and interacted a little bit with automations as well. So that's kind of where I started interacting with automating some support offerings. And then before that, I started in the customer support industry with Netflix back in 2009. And I actually started just by taking phone calls for Netflix as a frontline agent. That's how I started in the industry and began kind of working my way through leadership and training positions with Netflix until I made the transition to Airbnb back in 2015. So again, kind of went through the hyper growth phase with Netflix as well. So another thing that I've really seen is how to lay a foundation for CS or the outcomes of having customer support as an afterthought when you are growing rapidly, and how challenging it can be to work your way backward from there. So that being said, I have had a few opportunities to really focus on addressing some of our repetitive work through automation, which kind of led me down the path to meet you, Alan, and start working with Y Meadows.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm Alan Rich. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Y Meadows, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what Y Meadows does, we'll be telling you a little bit about it later, but we're a automation platform particularly focused on the customer support space with a strong set of technologies around natural language processing and natural language understanding, as well as robotic process automation. So be interesting to see how that technology fits into the whole story of employee morale as well. Just some administrative updates on the session today. So during the first part of the meeting, everybody will be muted except for Tyler and myself. And if you have any questions, then please put it into the chat. We'll be after Tyler and I finish our discussions, we'll be having a question and answer session, and we'll be answering the questions that were in the chat. And finally, we're recording everything on today's session, so we'll have a chance to send that out to those of you as well, so you don't have to take notes. Let's start off by just talking about some of the high-level items that we wanted to cover today. I think part of it is just general management principles for maintaining morale, things that apply, in my opinion, not just to customer support, but to all aspects of working with people and team building. But then there's certain additional challenges that I think are unique to the customer service space. And I think Tyler's uniquely qualified to address that and what the impact of those things are as well. And then finally, I think part of our discussion will be to talk about not only the people skills involved and processes and compensation methods and things like that, but also the technology that we can implement that might have an impact on morale as well. So 5, I think, interesting topics that we hope to cover today. So I think that's a good segue, Tyler, to talk about sort of, your view on kind of the people skills associated with managing the customer support teams. And you told us about this book that we put over here, so I'll let you explain the story there.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, one of the big kind of light bulb moments for me in my career in managing large customer support groups in a call center type of environment was reading Daniel Pink's book, Drive. So I think this, for me, is one of the biggest topics that we need to discuss today, and how we can utilize what we're talking about with technology and weave in the concepts that you find in Drive. But I think before that, kind of to your first question on the last slide, which is like general practices, I think we need to really recognize that before you get to managing these concepts and making a workplace engaging, you really have to check some boxes. Otherwise, you'll never really drive towards an engaging, high morale environment. Those things consist of pay, right? Are you paying commensurate to the work and the industry norms for the job that your team members are doing? If you can't check that box, then it's going to be very difficult to retain employees and maintain high morale. I think, some of these other concepts around just normal HR practices, surveying your team members, understanding what the main pain points are that you can address from an employee experience level are really important. And then building team cohesion is very important. Do people know the expectations of their role? Do they know what their individual goals are and the goals of the team are? Do you generate these conversations on a regular basis? Do you also work on camaraderie? Do you work on the way the team can interact in more of a social way, whether it's through norms in the mediums that you interact with in team meetings, your chat or Slack channels, even extracurricular offerings? I think those are all important concepts that if you can check those boxes, then you can really dive into what I would say real morale is driven by, lasting morale is driven by, which is engagement in the actual work, not necessarily the niceties and the benefits that come with a workplace. And I think oftentimes, companies do go down this path to attract talent and have great benefit offerings. But once the employee is there, you really do have to focus on making the work engaging. And that's where Drive, for me, has been a huge lever in my career in managing any group, whether it's managing direct frontline employees or teams of leaders who are managing their frontline employees, is focusing on these 3 main concepts. We all probably appreciate each of these concepts in our own way, but we also probably lean towards one or another as kind of a main lever for what makes a work environment really engaging. I'd also be willing to bet a lot of the leaders who are on this call lean towards mastery in a lot of ways. Mastery being kind of a concept around how am I growing professionally? Am I taking on responsibility and solving challenging problems, business problems, or problems for customers? Can you make the work something that is not necessarily stationary as far as the skill sets that are needed, repetitiveness, and not allowing employees to grow or at least receive recognition for the complicated work that they do. I think autonomy is another one that a lot of people lean towards, and in this changing work landscape, it's become a big one as far as where do I work from? What hours do I work? Who do I work with? What are the work types that I get to spend time on? This is an extremely challenging one to focus on in our industry in customer support, where we oftentimes have to meet customer demand. But I do think there are ways that we can create options and empower our employees to work a little more autonomously, solve different problems that really engage them personally. And the last one is purpose, that with the more dynamic work environments and the social environments that are social focuses that are happening outside of work, purpose is a big one these days too. Am I part of something greater than myself? Am I contributing to something greater than myself? Do I have social impact? Do I have impact on a company's mission? Am I working together in a team and helping other people succeed? And am I helping customers achieve something that's really important to them? I think if we can think of these three main concepts and really understand our employee base, find out what is important to them, and foster these different motivating characteristics, then I think we can really tap into making a work environment a place where folks enjoy coming to work every single day. They don't necessarily dread it when the alarm clock goes off. They don't feel like they're stuck in a rut when they're taking the same customer contact type that they have, 30 times that same day or that same week. So I really think it's important as we have this conversation that we use something like this as our touchstone around, are we able to create mastery, autonomy, or purpose when we are implementing some of these things like automation for our teams, that's going to make the work more engaging and really drive morale up.
It's, I was thinking about the very beginning part of what you said around team building and things. Have you found that the move towards working remotely, working from home, being a distributed team has changed your perspective on how to do those things?
Yeah, in many ways, I do think it has. I think we're definitely more distributed across the country. My team is totally remote, but even for teams who aren't necessarily remote, they're not all going to the office all the time. And that makes some of the levers we used to lean on a little more difficult. There's not an easy, let's go to happy hour approach to it necessarily anymore. I am not dropping by your desk and looking you in the eyes and solving problems in a more rapid way. I'm having to schedule that time in Zoom or Google Meets. There are many things that are lost these days that are pushing us to have to find different ways to engage as a team. Those, I think, also for a lot of people are benefits too. I think you can flip this on its head and still drive similar engagement, make it easier for folks to actually participate in engagement. So I do think we just have to think about it a little bit differently. We have to be very intentional in certain ways, where before we can rely on more natural interactions to build that engagement. But it definitely has shifted a lot to having to make the effort instead of relying on happenstance to drive engagement.
I'm going to just shift our focus a little bit towards, I divide the world of, these things in the sort of two primary categories. One is, I call it just hygiene, just doing the things that are right to maintain employee morale and keep things going. If you don't pay your people properly, if you don't manage them properly, there's, nothing you can do that's, I think, further down the chain that's going to fix it. But maybe you could shift your points a little bit towards now, what are unique customer support challenges around employee morale? And I think, you already talked about some of them, of just being able to face some of the same things repetitively. How do you handle, I guess, our industry's challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think hygiene is probably also an appropriate word for these. It takes constant work. There is no silver bullet that you can do one time and it's going to keep morale high. I think, it starts with empathy and understanding the work that your team is doing. In customer support, oftentimes you learn a specialty or a broad set of knowledge, and you apply that to contact types that are relatively static. I mean, your business is going to change over time. However, given enough time, your employees are going to have faced 95% of the questions or challenges that customers face and have. And they will probably not be challenged by the type of interactions or the actual technical portion of the interaction on a regular basis. So I think that's one big challenge that we need to address, is that feeling of constantly growing and learning more and applying new knowledge to what you do is hard to come by in customer support unless you have a constantly changing business model or you have many specialties that your team members can work through. I think the other one that is even more important here is recognizing that customers are rarely reaching out to us when things are going right. When your product is operating the way you want it to, a customer probably does not need human intervention. So when they are contacting your team members, they're contacting them with a frustration, with an emotion about what their experience has been, and your team member needs to solve that problem on top of the technical side of it. And for anybody who has to face that over a long period of time, even if they have very tough, thick skin, that's an emotional load that they have to carry with them, and they have to figure out how to deal with, right? How do I leave this behind at the end of my day? How do I not take this on to my next interaction? And I think, to me, that's one of the biggest challenges that we have to face, is how do I deal with maybe the mental hygiene of facing another emotional customer, another challenging situation, on top of being able to solve
So
this.
what do you do to help them with it?
I think, this is kind of getting into the meat of the conversation today, which is make the work meaningful. I think you need to turn the volume up for your team members on autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and what is really the most important thing for them. And purpose is the one that jumps to mind when I think about dealing with an emotional load. Having empathy for why this is so important for a customer is really important. And being able to tell a story, potentially metrically, about the outcomes that they achieve when we are able to do service recovery for a customer who is having a negative experience. Can we go out and solve whatever seam that they've experienced that's driven this negative interaction? So can we then empower that employee to work with our product teams? Can we then remove some work from their workload to clear room for them, or clear some time so that they can actually interact with a team that can help that customer and the next 10 customers after them? And I think that's where, automation to me is a really important thing. You can look at it as reducing headcount, which, yes, is a positive benefit, but one of the best benefits I've seen out of automating some work is clearing the less meaningful work from your team's plate and allowing them to focus on what you might call a moment of truth, something that is too complex, that will take investigation, it will take soft skills to address the customer's emotional concern, and then it will take some collaboration, whether it's with the customer or with one of your internal teams, to fix it. That is very meaningful work. So I think that, to me, is a really important thing. That can also facilitate mastery. this is your chance to actually go out and fix a business solution. You can actually have a portfolio of what you did that didn't just impact this one customer, but it impacted 10, 100, 1,000 customers. And if you can empower your team to actually do that and be the voice of the customer, instead of having workloads that are about resetting passwords or providing a different channel, what's your phone number, as opposed to the email or the chat that they're interacting with. If you can automate those types of things, you can actually focus your smart, dynamic, hardworking employees on more complicated solutions and the ability to be the voice of the customer. And I think that drives potentially all three of these concepts as well. Autonomy is in there too. If they're able to work with cross-functional stakeholders to solve problems that are engaging for them, I think that can feed more of the autonomy piece that in customer support can be extremely difficult to carve time out for and actually empower, your frontline entry-level employees to actually go do, and it can build some career pathing and career growth for them.
One of the things that surprised me, Tyler, is when you were new to Divvy Homes, you picked automation as almost your, one of your very first projects to implement right from the beginning. What was your thinking in making it such a priority?
Yeah, the fully honest answer, yes, is partially to deal with my team's morale. They were pretty beat up. They were dealing with long wait times, customers who have waited a long time, customers who were frustrated with their service, and this kind of no light at the end of the tunnel feeling. All I do is come in and have to crank out as many emails or phone calls as I possibly can. And so the first thing for me was I need to give a better customer experience. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I think automation can get a large amount of work off of my team's plate. And that's exactly what it did. It allowed my teams to not have to deal with the repetitive work. They could focus on more complex stuff. It reduced their workload and got us out of backlog. And it gave them a chance to pick their heads up, take a deep breath, think about what's driving the volume, and actually start addressing what are our systematic problems that are driving so many contacts to us. The other side that I won't be bashful about is it reduced my cost to serve. If I can reduce human intervention on some tickets and make it a pay per solution model, then I can measure my cost per interaction, weigh it against what an automation would cost per interaction, and actually bring costs down. So it wasn't all about team morale. It was about managing cost. It was about being more efficient for our customers. And the nice outcome was it did help with my team's morale. I also was able to use my team. I was able to let them shine and have a lasting impact by letting them author solutions and templates for customers and develop the workflows for these automations. So that really focused on the mastery portion of it as well, where my team got to really flex their skills. I get to now report back to them on a monthly basis on how many blank types of contacts we've automated, and they can say, like, I wrote that. I'm actually having this impact on a...
That's really interesting. I never thought of that as a perspective where they feel part of the automation process. It's not us against the machine. I'm not being replaced by a machine. It's on the contrary, I'm part of the process of creating meaningful work. It's a really nice way of fitting those two concepts together.
Yeah.
How did you pick which parts of the workflow to automate versus, and in what order?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, we were not operating off of a great data set when I started. We weren't tagging all of our emails appropriately. So we had to really start anecdotal. And then, I came to your team, Alan, and in full transparency, worked with another vendor that I had worked with previously and asked them to actually analyze my data. Take a look. Where are you seeing repetition, whether it's in the customer's questions or in the responses that were given? I brought anecdotal feedback from my team as far as, like, what are the templates that you send out constantly? How many times a day do you actually interact with this type of question? And we were able to kind of match these two anecdotal and actually your natural language learning modeling to say, like, here's the cross section of our biggest opportunities. And we were able to identify, some very low hanging fruit around people asking what markets you operate in. Can I get your phone number, or can somebody give me a call? And just finding those cross sections of high volume, low complexity interactions that we're having. And then it was more about the team and identifying the vendor that we would go with and how they could actually implement the solutions and work through the challenges of interacting with the different tools that we have, and what either actions we could take in our CRM, emails that we could automate, and then doing the cost benefit analysis. How much will this cost per, and how big is that cross section of emails that we could send out to start actually working through what those first interactions were that we were going to automate.
That's great. Thanks. On our last Brain Trust session, we touched on employee morale, and one of the topics that came up was compensation and incentive compensations, and should there be team-based compensations or individual-based compensations. And no, we haven't really discussed that ourselves, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that whole area.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think there's a straightforward answer here where it's like, of course, people want more money. They'd love to be able to bonus or unlock different levels of compensation if they achieve certain goals. To me, that's really just goal setting. And I think people also realize a certain amount of reward from achieving goals. So the monetary aspect of it, I think, it's a bonus. It's an added benefit that, of course, people are going to like. But I think your morale win, personally, just my opinion, if you're compensating people at a acceptable level, if not a larger level, you don't necessarily need the incentive pay. And I'm also slightly cautious with incentive pay because I oftentimes see it drive other behaviors to achieve your incentive pay, right? I love to focus on team goals, and I think that's where you can set a bonus structure that can have pretty positive outcomes if you have very clear expectations of what the outcomes you want to achieve are, and the team is driving towards them rather than an individual goal where an individual is trying to outshine their coworkers. So again, I go back to, did you check the box of appropriate pay for the position that you have? Then are you setting regular team goals and making sure the team is aligned around the goals, talking about how to achieve them, engaging in feedback around, like, are we on pace? Are we run rating towards the goal? You'll get a lot of team and individual morale in a situation like that. If you're asking me, the employee, though, yeah, you throw a bonus on top, and I'm going to work a little bit harder for it too. So I don't think it's a negative.
Okay, great. One last question. We talk so much about employee morale, but when I talk on the Brain Trust to some of the leaders, I find that they have their own morale challenges. They're finding that management frequently just expects them to do more and more work without additional resources, and they're struggling with the very same challenges at a level up. How do you deal with that, both perhaps for yourself as well as for your leadership team?
Yeah, I mean, company culture to me has a lot to do with that. I would say the concepts we've talked about are very similar for leaders as they are for individuals. Tap into autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Know your employee, know what really feeds them professionally. I think next is recognize that you have hired leaders for specific purposes. It's that Steve Jobs quote that I don't ever remember what the quote actually is, but the concept is, I'm going to hire people who know what to do. I shouldn't necessarily have to tell you what to do. And I think you need to carry that forward as their leader and their manager, and really give them the ability to make decisions, to solve business problems, not necessarily just receive marching orders from you. Now, there are going to be times where you have to do that as well. I think, though, a lot of times as leaders, particularly in like a fast-paced environment, you face a lot of challenges around work-life balance and competitive environments. And to me, that is modeling in a lot of ways. It's not rewarding long hours necessarily. There are going to be times where everybody has to work long hours. But if you're rewarding, and let's say in a performance review saying the person who is exceeding expectations is the person who's working a 12-hour day, that's going to reduce morale for just about everybody. And for the 12-hour a day person, they eventually are going to burn right out, right? So are you setting appropriate work-life balance reward for people who are smart and do good work, and they can fit it into an 8-hour day, 9-hour day, whatever you would consider like a normal work day for a leader? Then reward that good behavior. Don't just reward somebody who's always online, will always respond fast, will work on the weekends. And then I think model those. We all want to succeed. And if I see a leader who is working 12 hours a day, sending emails at 11 p.m. at night, working on the weekend, I'm going to think that's what that leader expects out of me. Now, you have to make those decisions for you. You might be in a situation where you have to work those long hours, but you need to find a way to make sure your team knows why you're doing that and that's not their expectation, or set, emails to send at a scheduled time ahead of time. Don't use your Slack or messaging system to ping at those odd hours, so that your team actually maybe has a different view of the behaviors that you have, the work hours that you actually keep. Or again, set proper expectations. I am in a situation where I'm going to work these long hours. I'm not necessarily imposing that on you, my team members, and make sure that you prop up those folks who work smart, not necessarily just work long hours.
Good, thank you. I'm going to just put up our sort of summary slide over here. We had just some of the takeaways, perhaps. We talked about morale and work experience, and I think eliminating and giving people meaningful work is one of the most powerful things in your tool chest of things that you could do to keep people excited about what they're doing. And to some extent, Y Meadows and Divvy Homes have had a good experience on focusing technology to help enable that, eliminating the mundane work, looking for things to save time, creating responses to repetitive questions so that the people can work on meaningful tasks. And I think you gave me an interesting perspective about engaging the team in actually creating these automations so that they see that they've done something that has a lasting impact on the team. So we have some questions over here that I'd like to share that came in on the chat, and we'll just do that for a couple more minutes. If anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. So one question is, do you have any insight on how to hire individuals who are motivated by autonomy and mastery rather than accomplishing tasks on a checklist?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really important to look for resumes that have accomplishments on them rather than skills and tasks and just job titles. Look for people who actually have accomplished things for a business. I think for me as a hiring manager, resumes really stand out that, yes, may tell me what title you had at that point in time, but I love knowing what an employee has accomplished in that title. Not necessarily that they were able to talk to 85 customers per day, but maybe they took that customer insight and they helped solve a website issue, or a policy that was driving negative interactions or negative perceptions of the company. So I think screening is a big part of this. I also think you need to tailor your interview questions a lot of ways. And I would go back to diverse hiring and how important it is for your business. So obviously creating diverse candidate slates is an extremely important thing. You're going to create a much more cohesive and productive team by having a diverse set of experiences, backgrounds, races, anything like that. But autonomy, mastery, and purpose, I would say, are very similar. You want all of those traits on your team. We all really like to reward high performers who are always crushing it numerically. But a lot of times, some of your best employees are not the ones that are trying to climb the ladder. They're the ones who like to be a part of the team, who aren't looking for the next job oftentimes. So really making sure you screen for things like what motivates you in the workplace. Tell me about the best team that you've ever been a part of in our industry. Create some actual questions around autonomy, mastery, and purpose that can help you probe and understand the strengths, the areas that team members lean towards. There's a really interesting podcast that was about super chickens. If anybody's ever heard this podcast, but it was really about the scientific experiment where the scientists created two different groups of chicken communities, right? They separated out chickens, and one set was a very strong group of chickens. They had high health characteristics. They were high producers of eggs. They, were larger than other chickens. And then they had a more diverse group of chickens that had some strong chickens and some that had maybe some health issues or deficiencies in different ways or didn't produce as many eggs, and measured kind of their population growth over time, their productivity as far as eggs go, maybe negative interactions. And it was very clear that the diverse group over a long period of time was much more healthy. And I think that's something that has really hit home with me on creating a team, is you need to look for a team that is not just full of super chickens, the high producers who are going to hit it hard and try to climb the ladder. That actually can create a pretty competitive work environment where it's not as supportive for other folks. Now, you do need some of those high performers, but you need people who are interested in purpose. They want to be a part of a team, a part of something greater. Some people who focus on autonomy and they get some special interests and they want to add value to the team in a specific area. That can be really healthy for the team. So I think it is your responsibility to carve out interview questions that can help you understand where potential team members might lean, and create a balanced team across these concepts. You're going to create a much more healthy team over the long run, and avoid some of the downfalls of the super chicken work environment that I think a lot of us have been brought up in and sometimes try to replicate.
Yeah, that's a great way. That's a metaphor that will stick in my mind. One of the questions comes up on implementation of technology, and to what extent you had the management stay involved in the implementation of new technologies and automations.
As much as I possibly can. I mean, I want to build as much bench strength as I can. I'd love to put myself out of a job eventually. I think of that as a pretty successful thing. So, it starts by engaging them and gathering insights and being your dowsing rod for where should we be looking to automate next. They all have different team members with different perspectives, but I would say anecdotal feedback is a really important thing, and they're closest to your team members who are experiencing what our community experiences, and they have to figure out how to balance, then teach them to balance between impact on a urgency level for one customer versus a lower urgent situation for 100 customers, and teach them where that decision-making balance can really come in and the impact that they can have. And then, I mean, as you've seen, Alan, I bring my leads into our meetings constantly to bring those insights and details back, and also to see what our conversations are like, so that they can hopefully replicate this on their own at some point in time. I would love for them to take over our relationship. No matter how much I like interacting with you, it'd be great if my leaders were actually in a position to step in for me.
How do you navigate culture changes that come from the top? Meaning change from mission first to ROI first. one of the questions that came in on the chat.
That's all about communication. I think personally, you always have to understand business context. If you don't understand business context, it's going to make change management extremely difficult, particularly when the change is coming from the perspective of business efficiency, business effectiveness, and generating ROI. We have a mission at Divvy Homes, and it's one that's really personal for me, but we are still a for-profit company, and that can be a really easy thing to lose sight of as an individual, as a leader, but also, your team can lose sight of that too, particularly if you're highly invested in the mission and the social impact that you can have. So constantly being able to express your mission and how it can or cannot be achieved if you're not achieving profitability or getting ROI on different initiatives is really important. Being an open book with your team, not commiserating with your team, not necessarily disagreeing, but always being able to go back, find out what that business context is, be able to communicate it to your team, and don't be afraid to acknowledge the fact that this may impact them negatively. It may not be as focused on the social impact as other decisions you've made, but there have got to be reasons for it. So being able to express that is very important.
What tools have you used to track burnout?
The one that I've seen most often would be pulse surveys on a monthly, quarterly basis that can give you feedback around what would you call it, like emotional security or like that environment where I can speak up and feel comfortable and feel like there won't be any punitive action taken against me. Surveys that give you feedback about engagement. I think one of the most important tools, it's the bottom line tool for me, is tracking attrition, both positive and negative. Say a lot about you and your team and the company culture. Ultimately, morale to me tracks back to attrition. There's a lot between your culture and attrition, but the outcome ultimately is how often are you having to replace, train, and ramp employees. The cost of that is humongous versus the cost of having somebody who's already trained, stay engaged, and stay productive. Even if productivity wanes, what's the balance against attrition?
If you see somebody from your team move to another part of your organization, maybe they go into product or, engineering, QA, do you count that as attrition?
I do count that as attrition. I would call it positive attrition, but I'd look at the root cause. Is your team very quickly looking for any other position within the company that they can apply for? And why? In entry-level positions, to expect an employee want to stay there for a long period of time, not very realistic. But to want to leave in a very short period of time, also slightly problematic. Are you setting proper expectations for what the employee should be carrying out? Are you giving them career pathing within your team and growth and skill sets and responsibilities? If not, then I'd look for those root causes that are driving positive attrition as well as negative attrition.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tyler, for a fascinating session today. And I'll put in a plug one more time for the Executive Brain Trust, which is our ability to regularly interact with people. And there's a email on here. You can reach out to summer.terry@whitemeadows.com if you'd like to join the Brain Trust, or if you'd like any information on the tools and products that Y Meadows offers. Thanks so much again, Tyler, for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you having me.